Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future Construct podcast. I am your host, Amy Peck, and today we're speaking with Aaron Anderson, who is the Director of Innovation at Swinerton. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks for having me, Amy. It's great to be here.
So you've had a really interesting career, and I want to get into your work at Swinerton. But how did you get into the space, and how did you become interested just in innovation in general?
Yeah, I think for me, I grew up in this in between generation, right, where my dad was working with hand tools. I watched my grandfather build, drywall with nails, and he'd have a mouthful of nails and his little drywall axe that he would do all the work with. But through my teenage years, and right after, we were all introduced to the internet, and at that point it was the wild west of the internet, where everything was free and it was all academic information. There was little advertising. It was these open email lists, and so for me, coming into the trades right after high school, I had this crazy context where it always seemed like the world was changing and people were on one side or the other of it. And
Yeah.
so for me, the story of coming up in the trades and learning to be a carpenter was this world of constantly seeing the possibilities versus all this hard work and bad drawings and lack of direction. And there's just this constant draw, as I was coming up and learning to build.
Yeah. I mean, do you see any parallels where we are today with now, moving from this sort of, 2D screens onto 3D and metaverse and Web3? And I think we're at maybe another one of another nexus.
Yeah. And I don't think we necessarily ever got over that first bump. Part of it is that a lot of those people that taught me to build when I was young are still holding on to those original ideas. We literally had to go buy books or find the right person that could teach us how to hand cut a roof for a residential building, or how to frame walls. All that information is available today, but there still is a guard on it. There still is a divide between all these licensed professional trade workers and the design world. And I feel like that's still something that hasn't fully been bridged. We have a lot of this next generation builder who is looking to digital design for instruction and to solve those problems in the field before they get there. But there's still a lot of work to bridge what looks more like a blue collar versus white collar, conflict, really. And I see that every time we try to bring a lot of these digital workflows into the job site.
Yeah. And is it sort of a, if it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of attitude, or just sort of a general, like, it's like, this is what I know how to do. I've been doing this for 30 years and you're not going to come in and give me a new way of doing things? Or you just think there's just a general reticence about technology that kind of, ripples through the trades? Because there are, I mean, I've also met a lot of tradespeople who are very advanced and they're using augmented reality, and they've got their iPads out, and so it doesn't seem like there's a prototype for someone who embraces technology, as opposed to, like, it doesn't seem age related or even experience related.
No, it's experience related in the way that we relate to the technology in our world, right? So if we come in and we want to digitize because we know at the end of that digitization that there's a really strong use case when it's all working together. if we keep delivering little pieces along the way that don't add to the efficiency and just create more work, then it starts to feel like the promise is never there. So there's a trust and there's a faith in the change and the growth that has to work there, right? So I think that's the hardest part, is that we don't always know exactly where we're going. and for us to come in and make someone's job harder or more difficult or force them to learn new things, and not necessarily make it more efficient or create value right in the moment, then we start to erode the trust that we have in that situation, especially if that end user doesn't see the big picture vision.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd love to, if you'll permit me, I want to quote what your profile says on LinkedIn, because I was really taken by it. That in your profile, you don't talk about, your experience the way everyone else does. It's like, oh, look at me, look how amazing I am. This statement is so fantastic. You simply say, inventing the next wave of construction project delivery through a cycle of wisdom, wonder, and getting deep in the weeds. I love that. So that is not typical of this industry, that way of thinking about things, and bringing in again, a sense of curiosity and wonder, combined with wisdom. So where does that come from? And those, I think, are words to live by. I love that.
Well, it's probably a little bit of overconfidence. There's some self-confidence in there that comes from saying, I've always been in a situation where you can give me a sawzall and a vision, and I'll go out and make the thing work, right? And so even even the education that I pursued, and the skill building that I pursued, it always puts me in a position where I want to do the next thing that somebody hasn't done, or solve the problem. And so I'm not, in some ways it makes me a liability. I'm not trying to, I'm probably not the best at finishing things along the way. But at the same time, um, all of our teams need a cheerleader and someone to imagine and to lead, but also in order to get in order to make that vision clear, we have to get into the details, right? And so I think there's a lot of people in the world who are structured thinkers and want a system and just want to go out and execute. And that's not really me. I've always been so even when I was, building residential houses in a production environment, if I didn't take at least a few minutes a day to step back and think about what we were doing in context, or try to think of a new way to do it, or, hey, what if we had this, or what if we could do that? Um, then my day just wasn't complete. So that's really where it comes from, is that I'm not the person that you bring in to say, oh, this person's done this before, let's repeat it here. It's always so important for me to understand the people, what the overall strategy of the business is, and then go in and work on solutions that fit that,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
let other people own it too,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. No, but I definitely wouldn't characterize that as a liability. I think you see this in academia as well, where we kind of get so in the weeds, and even within academia, we are studying to prove out incremental increases in terms of what we understand and what we know. And I think sometimes you need someone to come in completely from left field and say, let's just explore the art of the possible, and then we'll find the data to support it. And it's a different way of thinking, and I actually think it's where we need to be in terms of how we educate. Even starting from a very young age, is that big picture vision, and that kind of putting the A back in STEAM education, and not being so focused on STEM education.
Yeah, and for me, that's a big part of my life. I experienced a lot of adversity when I was a kid, and the art and the surrender to reality was like really the only way out. And so that's a big part of it too, is that some of the people that I love the most in life are the people that tell me they don't know. I don't know, but are still confident to move forward. And that's definitely the kind of heroes that we need in the construction industry today to get through all the noise and all the things that are coming at us, for sure.
Indeed. And in terms of what's happening now, and then even more technology evolving at just an unbelievable pace. It's almost impossible for someone who's focused on emerging technology to stay in touch with it. And in your day-to-day in innovation, how what kind of percentage of your day is like, all right, what can new technology do for us? And then what is like, all right, how do we just sort of incrementally improve what we're doing on a day-to-day basis? Because like, to your point, you can't just go, okay, here you go, guys, you're going to put on these augmented reality glasses and you're going to have a robot next to you and we're going to work with you. It doesn't, there is an incremental component to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm moving more toward trying to become the place where we test ideas and figure out what we don't know. We have a really strong business technology department that they're all best in class technicians at understanding cybersecurity and field applications, and they're right on that leading edge of applying technology in every, whether it's from emails or to communication tools. But there's still a lot of things that they don't necessarily get to spend time testing out and figuring out, right? And so that's really what we should be doing. But the way that we stay grounded, at least at Swinerton, is that we have this really strong self-perform focus. And so there's so many things just in the process and the way that we build that we not only have an interest in, but have an active responsibility to deal with. And so that's really what keeps us grounded in this world of a whole bunch of technology. But it's still really important to go out and figure out which of those technologies are really promising and powerful, but that don't have a solid use case. And so I would say I spend a little less time on that, except for the curious side of me, like yesterday, the announcement of the fusion reactions and, all that stuff and astronomy. And, I've got to stay in touch with that completely abstract side of the universe. But it's really grounding, because the part that moves the people that I work with, the other shareholders in my business, the folks in the field, is how to improve their daily lives. And so that those use cases and that business case really drives, that's what pays the bills.
So I'd like to come back and speak to that, because it sounds like you really have very much a culture of innovation at Swinerton. But we're going to take a moment and hear from our sponsors, and we will be right back. All right, we are back speaking with Aaron Anderson, who's the Director of Innovation at Swinerton. So what are the things that that are exciting you today? Like, is it technology? Is it new process? Like what makes you leap out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, it's a little bit along the lines of what we've talked about so far, with that interplay between what's happening in the field and what's happening on the edge of technology and discovery. And I feel like the robotics tools that are coming into construction with the autonomous abilities, and just also finding ways to do the tasks that we have that are difficult and repetitive, that there's a lot of value in that. And then at the same time, I feel like the folks that we do have in the field can really benefit from clear instruction, and so many of the inefficiencies and transaction costs that occur in construction are really coming from what still looks like a disconnected design process, where we have an architect communicating ideas and intent, and program, and then we get that into this design development process. And not everyone is at the table at the right time. Not everyone is working off of the same models. Not everyone is communicating to their teams in the same way. And even at the center of all that, the contract is really based on a set of paper drawings that maybe no one looks at too often anymore, you know. And so we've had these digital tools in place, but the level of detail that's available in them and the way the processes that we build around them have really still kept us from delivering explicit instructions to an installer in the field. You know, these things are getting missed. Tools that take some of the more difficult things to place accurately, like a concrete deck, is really difficult to place concrete highly accurately. You know, we got the forms in the exact right place, everything is perfect, and then we're pumping super heavy concrete out of this thing falling out of the sky, right? And so tools that can take us into those processes and give us real-time feedback about what we're doing, what's actually completed, comparing those drawings to what's actually being done in the field. So there's a lot of really great progress that's being made in the object detection world for computer vision, which I think is really powerful. I think there's still some barriers there in terms of the actual routines and the way that we talk about the activities in our schedules and the components in our models. But we're at a place where we're gonna sit down at a table pretty soon and decide which activities go into a model and which ones get estimated and which ones are recognized by computer vision and these other tools and laser scanning, and be able to get that real-time feedback about what's going into place, how fast it's going into place, and how accurately it's being installed.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always been flummoxed by why we don't build the as built while we're building the building. We've got the walls open. I mean, we now have an incredible technology, where you mentioned laser scanning or LiDAR, that can actually give us a pretty accurate depiction of what's happening. My thesis is that if you trigger a payment with it, it'll get done.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to court clients with that right now, right? Because part of the problem too is that the incentives, the economic incentives, aren't really there for any individual party to tie all this together. And then a lot of our developer clients don't all have the long-term vision for operating, maintaining a building for 50 years. They're looking more at these short-term market expectations. And then the architects themselves are seeing squeezes on price because they're the first one to come into the space, and there's not a budget for solving all the problems in construction when we're just trying to get a basic conceptual design down.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Do you think it's the owners that are going to have to make the demands, in the process to start tying all the elements together? Because it seems obvious, right, to have a singular system and then a standardization process. But the problem is then the SaaS companies that are delivering to the construction industry again, and that's there's a cause and effect, right, where there's blockers everywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's a crawl. I mean, it's like whenever you look at game theory or you look at competition theory, it's always a back and forth. Like we can sit down all day and talk about the 5 options that each person has and map out the result of that, but it's a crawl. And every year somebody pushes in this space and then somebody else pulls in this space, and it starts to come together. I think that's the reason why a lot of us are having that same vision about pay application and things like that, is because there is this clear direction that we should and could go in that's going to benefit everyone. But what's interesting is that all those little steps along the way are ultimately what are determining that economic equilibrium at the end of this state, right? And so that's where that's where, as individuals, as we're developing this stuff, we can think forward and think about what where we want to be positioned when that's happening, and then gauge our investment in that technology along the way. But I just don't think that vision is clear enough for enough of those players yet to start making those investments that are going to get us to that pay application or smart contract place yet.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I think we're seeing it in most industries where, everyone's kind of sticking their big toe in, but unless there's a very, very clear economic benefit, and I think you even mentioned that, a lot of this technology is a solution looking for a problem, right? And so it's like, how do we really leverage it to where it becomes an end-to-end solution? I'd like to circle back. You mentioned your grandfather, and we were speaking offline before we started recording. You mentioned, first of all, that you saw him as being a very analog person, but he also has an interesting history. And if you're willing to share, I'd love for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the discovery, and just the strangeness in the world, the messiness in the world, and where we can all find where we can find inspiration, but also just understand how things happen. And for me, so it was actually my grandfather's great uncle. So it was a few generations ago when you could kind of get away with this, but he started growing his beard. They came here. They came here after World War I, or maybe during World War I, and they basically beelined it for the Midwest because they didn't like most Norwegians, they didn't like to be around other people. And so so they found this quiet spot with a couple hundred acres in Nebraska, right? And anyways, they worked as a community, but he started growing his beard when he was in his teens, and working the fields. And after a little while, he started rolling it up on a stick to keep it out of the way, and would stick it into his vest. But he persisted with that and really never cut it. And it at some point it had grown to almost 16 feet long.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It ended up sort of in some ways being his retirement plan, because in those days you could, without television and radio, people would tour around, and it was sort of these freak shows, right? And so people would show up. He had this big, beautifully carved wooden throne that they would take around, and he had these really prominent cheekbones and big, like, gnarly hands, and he would sit on this throne with the beard kind of like wrapped down and around. And people would pay to come and see him in his beard. But it even started, that beard even started some competitions that they started running across the Whiskerinos, I think is what they called. So at some point he was considered the king of the Whiskerinos. But yeah, we got to go see that beard at the Smithsonian a few years ago. And we were invited into the back of the Smithsonian, and there's incredible things in this place. Like, there's all the insects in the world are cataloged
Wow.
in filing cabinets there. And then after the Repatriation of Antiquities Act stuff happened in the 90s, they took all the bones that had been on display and they moved them back into these warehouses. And so there's all these giant racks with galvanized buckets full of bones. And so we got to look at some of the bones, and they showed us what they were using them for, identifying, this is what happens when someone gets struck with a rock in the back of the head. And this is the way that the skull fractures or something like that. Or this is what happens when someone gets, metal poisoning, and this is what their bones and fingers look like. And so that's one of the things they use this space for. But they pulled this beard out onto the table and lay it all out, and they have it kind of wrapped up on this board. And you could see all the lines in it. You could see all the years and every harvest season that he had gone through. So at this point, there's like these little stratifications in the beard, and you can see pollens and grasses and things like that in the beard. And it was this little
a little historical registry.
Yeah, exactly. It's a historical registry. It's like almost like an ice core, you know.
Yeah.
And you could look back through his life on the thing. So it's interesting that that sometimes, you know, like when he was young, he didn't expect any of that stuff, right? He didn't. It was just this thing that he did, and maybe he was compulsive or obsessive compulsive, or you know, whatever it was. But it was just this thing that started, and it turned into something that he was able to take advantage of, and that we're able to look back at and find
Yeah.
find a bunch of insight into. So
Yeah, but I think that's kind of a great example of, you know, how the past, you know, impacts the future, but also the kind of humanity that we can't lose sight of with all of the
right.
technology, everything that's coming through, because that beard through science tells a story of that time, which I think is an interesting parallel to some of the things that we're all working on today to try and improve outcomes.
Yeah, and you know, for me, it's interesting. It even exposes like ancient past and stuff, you know, because I look at that beard from 150 years ago, and it also helps me to imagine the way that people lived 15,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Or more, you know. It starts to give us this insight into anything that's not exactly what we're looking at right now. Is helps us to understand how we can move forward.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So before I let you go, I'd love to ask you the last question that I ask everyone, which is that if you could project yourself 20, 25 years into the future, and you could bring with you any gadget or service that just makes you personally happy or in some way makes your life better, what would it be and what would it do?
Yeah. All right. Well, one of the I like gadgets. I'm really a big fan of tools that help me make decisions. And so when I think about the consequences of this idea, which is usually where I go first, they're not all that rosy. But at the same time, I would really love a tool that exposed the real cost of things. Um, you know, one of the struggles that we have in our business, and then even in my own personal life, is like, you know, we talk about sustainability, we talk about, you know, social responsibility. All these things have to do with economic externalities, and it would be really great to be part of a system that took into account like all the finite availability of resources and the consequences of our behavior on other people and situations, and just a little optimizer tool that said, you know, hey, if you make this decision, it's going to, you know, optimize the the inputs that you've got right now. The problem with that, and of course, like I said, I always go to the consequences of that, is that I've done some work in data analytics and economics and just data gathering, and it's like to model a system that can predict the future, you really need a computer that's the size of the universe, with every piece of the universe modeled, its behavior modeled exactly. And then you'll probably be able to predict what's going to happen right now.
Yeah, well, it's you're sort of bleeding right into quantum, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All of this is happening at the same time, and you're able to predict exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Well, on the fantastical side, you know, let's just assume that we're going to overcome the challenges and the physical time, space, and managing all the data in the universe at one time, and that you will get your. Because I think we do need to have a better understanding of cause and effect in general, in everything in our lives, and so I think that would be a fantastic tool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Well,
the new morality. Thanks.
exactly. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Appreciate it.